you everybody for joining us for another one of our talks in this winter series from our Northern Ireland Botanical Skills Project, which is a project that aims to support botanists across the skills spectrum with training, events, and webinars like this. And I want to thank our funder, DARA, who have made this project possible. And also, if you've come to this talk and you've never ever heard of the BSBI, well, this is the BSBI up here, the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland. We do all sorts of wonderful training activities, webinars, talks. So if somehow you've reached this without ever hearing the BSBI, do look us up. This is the second in a series of talks running this winter. There's going to be 13 or 14 of these webinars in total. One has happened already. That video's on YouTube. All of them are going to be recorded, so you can watch them again at your leisure. So once again, if this is the only talk you've heard about so far, please do look at the rest of our program as well and book some of those talks. We've got some fantastic things coming up about club mosses and hawthorns and environmental robotics and anything else that you could possibly imagine. In our talk tonight, there will be a Q&A at the end. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So as the talk is going, if a question occurs to you, drop it in there. And at the end, I will serve up some questions. We may not have time for every single question, but we'll get through as many as we can. And I think that's everything we need to know. So I am delighted to introduce our speaker tonight, Lynda Weekes. Lynda is a botanist by trade with a particular experience in heathland and freshwater ecosystems. For the past 8 years, she's been a lecturer on the wildlife biology degree programme at MTU Kerry. Before that, she worked with the National Biodiversity Data Centre in Waterford, where she helped collate the National Vegetation Database while completing her PhD research on river vegetation classification. During her time there, she also co-authored the National Biodiversity Data Centre's identification guides to grasses, as well as another on sedges and rushes. And so I am delighted to hand over to Lynda.
Thanks a million, James, for that introduction, and welcome to everybody. I'll just share with you my screen here so that you can see the presentation that I have here tonight. Let me just see. Hopefully you can see that. If there's any problem, James, you might let me know, but I think
no, that's perfect.
See that. Yeah. So tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to just, it's aimed at kind of beginners, and maybe some intermediate people might gain some knowledge as well. So we're going to look at rushes particularly tonight, and just to give you a rundown of what we're going to cover. We'll have a look at what the differences between grasses, sedges and rushes are, because sometimes it's difficult to say whether you've got a sedge, rush or grass. So we'll have a look at that briefly. We'll have a brief look at how many rushes we have on the island of Ireland altogether. And apologies to those maybe listening in from Britain. We're just looking at the Irish species tonight, but hopefully you'll learn something from that too. And we'll look at the main features of rushes that are useful for ID. We'll distinguish between two rush species, Juncus and Luzula. And then we'll concentrate on Juncus species alone tonight and look at their species ID. And I'll just point you in the right direction for keys and guides that might help you at the end. And just a quick nod to the hybrids and other information that we might look at in the second webinar. So that's the plan. Now, I suppose grass, sedges or rushes, what have we got? There's several things. We can look at the stem, the ligules, and if the grass, sedge or rush isn't flowering, stems and ligules can be useful. But really diagnostic are the flowers, really. Okay, so the stems in sedges are mostly triangular, but not often, not always. They're mostly solid. Rushes, they tend to be rounded stems, but not always. And grasses tend to be rounded and hollow, but not always. So it's a pointer, but it's not going to give you a surefire reason that is, for a choice there. Ligules. Ligules are little membranes that arise from where the stem joins the leaf. Uh, Usually they're fused along most of their length in sedges. Rushes often have none. Now, when I say none, they do have them sometimes, but they can be pretty obscure. And grasses, if they have them, well, they do have them, but they're free along their length and attached at the base. But sometimes they can be quite obscure in grasses. So really the thing to look at is, to be sure when you're starting off, is looking at the flowers. So with the flowers, sedges have a fruit, or where the flower arises from, that turns into a fruit called the utricle. And that has one little scale on it called a glume. If you're looking at rushes, you have what's called the capsule, which develops from the flower, which contains seeds in it. And you have 6 kind of scales around it, 6 segments around that. So if you see 6, you know that you have a rush. If you have 1, you know that you have a sedge. And if you have 2 glooms, you know you have a grass. The seeds then are a little bit like hard to tell apart really if you're starting off. And we might come back to a couple of those in relation to rushes a little bit later on. But it's all very well looking at a photo or a diagram like this. Let's have a look at photos so you know exactly what they really look like. So just to give you an example here of, sorry, this doesn't seem to be clicking onto the next slide. Oh, there it is. Just to give you an idea of what a sedge flower and gloom looks like. This is a sedge, a typical sedge inflorescence. They don't all look like this, but the key thing is, if you have a hand lens and you look really, really closely at this, on the right-hand side, we are focusing up here. This is the utricle, this green flask-shaped thing here. And you can see the gloom there is that little brown thing with the green stripe. Okay, so that, if you see just one like that, that is just one gloom, you know you have a sedge. And there's some ligules there, different shapes of ligules that you might have. I'll show you a ligule in a photo of a grass, which might be easier for you. So let's have a look at the grass. I'm having difficulty going on to the next thing here for some reason. Sorry, now it seems to be working slowly. Here's a grass inflorescence. And if you look at, this is the whole inflorescence here, and each of these little things is called a spikelet. And if we go over here and zoom up on a spikelet on the right-hand side, here we have a typical spikelet of a grass. And these here are flowers that will turn into seeds. But at the very base of all grasses, this one happens to have 3 flowers in its spikelet. Could have 1, could have 2, could have more. But the key thing here is, if you look at the base of the grass floweret or spikelet here, you have 2 glooms. 1, 2, these 2 little scales. So if you have 2 of those, you know you have a grass. And down here, here is a ligule, a photo of a ligule here. Here's the stem and the leaf and the ligule. So just check those out to make sure that you've got a rush, all right? Here is a rush here. Here's the inflorescence of a rush. And if we zoom up on 1 or 2 of the flowers here, you can see in the inflorescences lots of different flowers. This is the capsule that is developed from the flower that contains seeds inside. And you'll see these segments around here. If you counted those, you'd have 6 of those. Now, they could be shorter than the capsule, they could be longer. But if you look very closely with a hand lens and count these scales, you'll see that there's 6 of them. So that's how we know that we definitely have a rush. Let's have a look at the main features of the rush for ID purposes. So this, I know this diagram's a bit crude, but hopefully it'll show you at least the main features. So I suppose the first thing is that you have, yep, there we go. We have a leaf here. Now, some of them have leaves that are obvious, but some of them actually have leaves that are reduced to scales at the bottom of the base of those stalks, I suppose. Here are typical leaves that are reduced to scales at the base of the plant. So look for those because sometimes that's important. You may have flowering stems as well, or only, and you'll know a flowering stem because it's got an inflorescence on the top. And in that, sometimes you have, as part of that inflorescence, you might have a bract, which could look like the stem itself, or could look leaf-like, but that can be important for ID as well. And of course, you have your flower with your perianth. They're called perianth segments, but we'll call them segments for short here. And you can see that there's 6 of them around there. And there's a photograph of some segments there that are really thin and pointy. They're not always as thin as that. So those are sort of the basics. Oh yeah, and of course the fruiting capsule in there. So those are the things we need to look out for when we're trying to ID rushes. So how many do we have? On the island of Ireland, we have 24. So 24 rushes, and we do have more in Britain. There are a good few more, but we have 24 sort of easily recognized ones. And a number of 24, we can easily kind of get to know the rushes pretty well, except for maybe the really rare ones. So it is something that we can aim towards getting a better knowledge of if we're starting off. We have 2 genera. We have Luzula species and we have the Juncus species. So we have 6 Luzulas and 18 Juncus. Now, what I'm going to do today is we're not going to look at the Luzulas tonight because I think we have enough to do with the Juncuses. And to be honest, if you're a beginner, I don't want to overwhelm you with loads and loads of information anyway, because what would be great is that you come away with feeling confident about going out and looking for rushes now that you know at the end of what to look for, I suppose. So we'll concentrate on the Juncus, but to recognize a Juncus, I suppose it's important to be able to distinguish between a Juncus and Luzula. Sorry for the delay here. It seems that there's a delay in me actually changing from slide to slide here. I don't really understand why, so apologies. Oh, I think it's changed now. Yeah. So Juncus, the fruiting capsule has 3 seeds within. Now, that's just for your information. You are really not going to be able to see that very well because the capsules are very small, and to actually split one in the field is really difficult. So it's just for your information. I wouldn't be looking for that really. I suppose the key thing to look for is that the leaves are hairless. That's the main key thing, that you have hairless leaves with a Juncus. They're often cylindrical, but not always. And then for Luzula, then, the key thing is that the leaves are hairy. You can see here in this photograph that we've got a stalk here and the leaf coming out here. The leaf is, you can see these wispy, sort of long, hairy bits. That's the hairs typically you're going to find in the Luzula species. And also the leaf is flat. It looks like a grass with big bristly hairs. That's the flowering head there. And if you think that this might be a grass, check for the bristly hairs that are really long and wispy. And also, if you see here closely, you can count 6 segments up there. So you know that it wouldn't be a grass with those 6 segments in these flowers with all these capsules on top. And just for your information, the capsules of Luzula have lots of seeds, many seeds within. But as I say, we're not going to look at Luzula tonight because I think we have enough to look at in the Juncus species. So we have 18 species altogether of Juncus. I have them listed on this slide here to the left and right. And in the middle, I have just a photo there of the identification guide of Ireland's sedges and rushes, which is published by the National Biodiversity Data Centre in Waterford in the southeast of Ireland there. And the reason why I've got that book is because I'm co-author on it. I'm not trying to push it on anybody, but I'm using the approach we took in that book to introduce you to the different types of juncus that we have. And what we've done in this book, it's not a botanical division. It's literally a division to help people focus on, you know, a group of characteristics that can be applied to several species. And it's easy then to sort of, well, if I've got this characteristic and this characteristic, well, then it must be one of 4 juncus or one of 2 or whatever the case may be. That's kind of the approach we've taken in this book for sedges as well as rushes, but we're just looking at the rushes. So this is what the sort of the main division that we have in this book for these. So let's have a look at the main divisions. We've got 18 species. How do we decipher them all between each other? Let's start with the first 4. There they are. Juncus filiformis, inflexus, effusus, and conglomeratus. Now, all of these have inflorescences to one side of the stem. You can see in the photo there that you've got the stem here and the inflorescences to the side. Now, technically and botanically speaking, that's not quite true, because the stem looks as if it's continuing up beyond the inflorescence, but in fact that's technically a bract, but it looks like a continuation of the stem. So that's what we're taking it as here. Now, what's important with this is that the leaves are reduced to scales at the base of the stem, so we can see them here. So if you've got scales at the base of the stem, which can be different colors, by the way, they're kind of reddish here. They can be dark brown as well in a different species. But the key is inflorescence to the side of the stem, leaves reduced to scales at the base of the stem. So let's have a look at these 4 species. So Juncus effusus, you're probably familiar with this. This is the soft rush, and you'll notice that the inflorescence is quite diffuse. The stem is very glossy, very smooth. And the epidermis, the green outer coating of these stems, is easily peeled away like a banana to kind of reveal kind of a spongy core in the middle. So if it's easy peeled and you have dense spongy stuff inside, which used to be incidentally used for candle wicks, the rush candles years ago by sort of rural people in Ireland. They used to soak them with animal fat, and they used to use them as lighting for their houses. So that's Juncus effusus. If you have a look at the next one, and I'm tapping away madly here and nothing's happening, which is a bit annoying for you, so I'm very sorry about that. There just seems to be some delay when we're online here. Hopefully it'll come soon. Here we go. It takes about 6 or 7 taps, but never mind. Juncus conglomeratus is another very common one. And it's much more compact inflorescence, as you can see, compared to effusus. The stems are ridged, so you'll see little furrows in the stems, and they're not easily peeled. The epidermis isn't easily peeled, but if you do peel some back, you'll notice that there's irregular air spaces inside, some bigger ones and smaller ones. It's less dense than Juncus effusus. And then we have Juncus inflexus here, very diffuse inflorescence. You have more pronounced ridging or furrows, I suppose, in the stem here, which is much thinner and stiffer. And those stems look kind of blue-green compared to these 2 here. And if you open up and split the stem, you'll notice that there's regular air spaces, these little air spaces here. So those patterns in the pith are actually really characteristic of those species. Now, one you mightn't come across I've only come across it once, is Juncus filiformis. Filiformis is actually pretty rare in Ireland. It's very, very fine. It's got its inflorescence is made up of single stalks with single flowers, and it's very, very slender. The inflorescence is midway between the top of the stalk and the bottom. So that's really characteristic, whereas these are further up near the top. Um, and it's very rare. It's found in Loch Allen, and I think we have one found in Slieve na Mon in County Tipperary as well a couple of years ago. Rory Hodd had a field trip out there. I think they might have found it, but I'd need to confirm that for you. But it's pretty rare to find. It might be less rare in England. I'm not sure about that. Okay, so that's those four. And again, I'm just waiting for this to move on here. We're having difficulties in getting that going. Hope you're enjoying the pictures there, because I'm not moving here. Might be a connectivity problem, I'm not sure.
Well, we're certainly enjoying the pictures, Lynda.
Oh, thanks very much, James. You're very kind. Okay, here we are. So look, I won't keep saying about the delay, but if there's a delay, just apologies. You know what's happening. It's just taking a bit of time to go through to the next one. Here we have two more inflorescences to the side. This time, though, we have leaves and stems present. So in the last four, we had just flowering stems, and the leaves were reduced to scales. Here we have both leaves and stems present. So the leaves look very similar to the stems, except the stems have inflorescences on them. So these two are coastal species. One is pretty rare, but if you find it, there's lots of it probably in one area, but generally speaking, it's pretty rare. And that's Juncus acutus here. And I don't know if you've ever seen it before, but it's got lethal spikes to the end of it. They're dangerously sharp and very hard. They're very large tussocks. They're pretty dramatic. You'll see them on kind of muddy, sandy banks on the coast. Their capsules are way above, they reach way above the segments below here. They're pretty rare, as I say. Both coastal. Here is one that's more common, that you're more likely to find. There are sharp points, and they're pretty sharp. If you walk through them with shorts on and they're quite short, you will if the rush is quite short, they'll kind of scratch you pretty hard, but they're not near as hard and as sharp as these things here in Juncus acutus. So this is Maritimus. Clumps rather than large tussocks, stems sharp points, capsules are usually light brown as opposed to glossy red-brown of acutus, and your perianth segments are generally they're longer than acutus, and they're pointier, and they're at least as long as the capsule. And that's the one you're most likely to come across more regularly around the coast. So, just waiting for this to move on. What we're going to look now is in the next group, we'll move away from the ones that have inflorescences to the side, and we will look at those that have inflorescences on the top. And I'm just waiting for this to move along nicely. If I ask it nicely, it might move on. We're still waiting. I really don't understand this, but sure, look, it's happening. So, okay, well, look, I'll talk about the next one. Hopefully it'll come up soon. So we have a group of, well, we're looking at inflorescences on the top of the stem next. And I suppose the key thing to look for first is if you take a stem and you split it down the middle and see if it's hollow or not, and if it has these segments. So it's not moving here. I wonder, would I just see if I can come out of the slideshow? I'm just going to end this slideshow for a sec. Do tell me if you're still, am I still sharing? Hopefully I am. And what I might do is just, James, you might tell me there, can you still see this
Yeah,
presentation?
I can still see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
It
think this
might
is,
just work faster if I have it in this mode.
yeah, that
And
feels like a clever solution.
yeah, and just I'll just not show the ribbon, show tabs only. Now I'm going to try this, guys, and just see. Hopefully it'll work a bit better than having to be delayed. Sorry now. So we'll go on to the next one. Yeah, just see. Yeah, so here we have a group of 3 species with the inflorescence on the top and the leaves hollow with internal transverse partitions. So here we'll just go on to the next slide. Yeah, I think it's working better here. So here we have 2 of them here, or 3 of them. I did have sort of one appearing at a time, so I can't do that really when I'm not in slideshow mode, so you just have to bear with me. But at least you hopefully won't have to sit there waiting for it to go on to the next slide. So what we have is Juncus articulatus here on the left-hand side. Both of these, Acutiflorus and articulatus, has a hollow stem with segments in it. And actually, even if you don't split the stem and you get your finger, your forefinger and your thumb, and you put a bit of pressure on and rub up the stem, you will feel those little bumps as you hit those segments, and you'll know that you either have articulatus or acutiflorus. Now, articulatus, the leaves have transverse sections only, as does acutiflorus. Leaves tend to be flattened, even though they're hollow, they tend to be more oval in cross-section in articulatus, whereas in acutiflorus, they tend to be more cylindrical or rounded in cross-section. Often articulatus grows kind of parallel to the ground, like this photo is showing here, and then it kind of curves upwards at the inflorescence curves upwards. That's a real typical sort of growth habit, whereas acutiflorus is found pretty much growing upright. The capsule in acutiflorus is generally sharply pointed, and the capsule in articulatus is got a rounded tip with a little blip on the top there. And if you look at the segments, they tend to be more acute and turn out in acutiflorus. But sometimes these two can be quite hard to tell apart. If you see a field full of acutiflorus, or if you see a field full of upright ones, it's most likely acutiflorus. This is more kind of, they grow more in kind of little tussocks, if you like, or little tufts, more in near pools and stuff like that, generally speaking. We might have a look at those two in a little bit more detail in a more advanced webinar. Perhaps we can come back to those two, because I say they hybridize as well, which can cause challenges. The other one is subnodulosis, and it not only has your transverse sections, but it has a longitudinal section down the stem as well that you might see there. It's pretty distinctive from these two, because the inflorescences, the angle of the stems of your flowering stems here are very at right angles to the stems. So they're very much broader, I suppose, inflorescences there. And the perianth segments tend to be kind of straw colored, whereas the segments here are quite dark. So those are those 3 with your segments. So I can just click on here and go on to the next one without delay, hopefully. Yeah. So the next thing we might look at is still looking at inflorescences at the top of the stem, but this time the leaves are solid and they're channeled. So what the leaves look like, here's a photo of one here, but just to show you what it would look like in cross sections, like a gutter, really. If you think of a gutter on going around the under the roof of your house, that's the kind of shape of leaf we're talking about there. So inflorescence is the top of the stem, solid channeled leaves, and we have 4 species we can have a look at here. So let me just show you that. Here on this one. Yeah, so here are 2 coastal species. So we have Juncus gerardii, gerardii, and we have Juncus compressus. Compressus is quite rare, and if you're along the coast, you're much more likely to come across gerardii, I would imagine. Now, look, I've given you some pointers as to how to distinguish between these. Stems tend to be 3-angled in gerardii. Stems tend to be flattened and curved in compressus. Leaves tend to be dull green in gerardii, blue-green in compressus. Perianth segments tend to be dark brown and pointed in gerardii, whereas pale and blunt in compressus. And this one is pretty frequent. You definitely come across this one along the coast, especially kind of on gravelly sort of fine gravelly sort of coastlines rather than sandy. It's more gravelly, getting into cobbledy areas. Whereas compressus is pretty rare. It's found around the River Shannon. But as I say, these are kind of pointers. But I've tried to distinguish between these with these vegetative features, mostly vegetative features, and a bit of the perianth segment here. But they're quite difficult. And just for confirmation, you really need to see them in flower and have a look at the anthers and stigmas and also the seed size inside the capsule. So it takes a little bit more delving to really distinguish between these. But I'd say unless you're along the River Shannon, you've mostly got gerardii. So that's those 2. And then the other 2 with channeled leaves. One that most people probably that are hill walkers are familiar with is Juncus squarosus here. If you, there's the inflorescence, which is really quite, it stands out as kind of real chocolatey brown capsules that are quite glossy. So they're quite showy actually on the bog. But if you don't have those, you won't go wrong with seeing wiry, waxy, sort of squaros leaves amongst kind of mat grass usually up on the uplands. That would be your Juncus squarosus. And if you actually put your hand around it and kind of squeeze it, it's kind of like wiry feeling. So that's squarosus there, peaty uplands. One that I almost guarantee that you've walked over this, even if you've never known that you have. This is Juncus tenuis. It's actually an alien species introduced from the USA. Where you'll find it mostly is along kind of woodland tracks and stuff, particularly where there's coniferous woodlands. And they've got really sticky capsules which stick on people's feet and stick on tires and things like that. So you'll find them along trackways. And they are, once you know them, you can't miss them, but they are so fine. This photograph is a bit deceptive because it looks as if it's pretty big and easy spotted, but it's actually really, really fine. And you have to look quite hard to be able to see it. But once you see it, you can't miss it again. All right. So very fine, but it's the only Juncus species that has 2 bracts, forked bracts like that, going up either side. So once you see those, they're pretty obvious. But just remember, they're very, very fine. So the next time you're out along a woodland track, or in a park, even like we have it in, I work down in Tralee there, Killarney National Park. It's all along the pathways. Anywhere where people are walking or trampling, I guarantee you'll almost find it everywhere. So keep an eye out for that if you haven't seen it before. Now, let's go on to the florets, or the inflorescences now are in clusters. So you have kind of broad inflorescences, and the florets, or the sort of like the capsules, if you like, are clustered in little groups in branched inflorescences. The leaves appear solid, but they're not really solid, which I'll show you now in a sec. And they're less than one, I said less than one here, that should be less than 1 millimeter wide. There's only one species that you'll come across that is like that, and that's Juncus bulbosus. But it's an interesting species because it can look really, really completely different if it's in water. So we'll deal with the more terrestrial version here. This is Juncus bulbosus here. So if you're walking along peaty area, that's maybe there's ditches cut along tracks in peat, you're most likely to come across this one. And the inflorescence is very, very branched, and you'll see these little clusters along the branches. And if you look very closely at the clusters here, you may notice, you have to look at several, but you may notice that there's little plantlets growing out of some of those capsules. So the seeds can germinate on the plant and grow into little plantlets, which eventually fall off and take root. So the term for that is a viviparous. So these flowers can be often viviparous. In other words, they can germinate in situ in the inflorescence. The capsule is quite blunt, and your segments don't reach the top of the capsule, as you can see in the photo there. Now, I just mentioned that the stem appears solid, but actually, if you got a little blade and cut a stem cross in transverse section, if you looked really closely with a hand lens, you might notice that there's two little canals, actually hollow tubes running up through those stems. But it can be quite challenging to see, and you don't really need to see it, to be honest. But if you're interested, you might have a look at that the next time that you're out. Now, just talking about the aquatic form, this stumped me for months when I first saw it. I saw it up in Donegal in the rivers, acidic rivers in Donegal. This is the very, very same plant. And what it looks like is grass. It looks like thin, bristle-like grass flowing in the river channel, and it's got no flowers. Well, when I saw it, I didn't see any flowers underwater. And was it a grass? Was it a pondweed? I had no idea until eventually, after much research, I found out that it's the aquatic form of Juncus bulbosus here. So you may or may not come across that. So keep an eye out for that. Now, there's other features that you can look at to distinguish it from, say, pondweeds and stuff, but I don't think we'll really go into that. But if anybody's interested, we can talk about it later. If anybody's interested to sort of eliminate it from other things, we can talk about that later. This one I haven't actually seen in person. It's pretty rare. Juncus planifolius. It's the only one that actually has flat leaves. And again, if you got maybe confused with Luzula species, check the leaves and you'll see that there's no bristly hairs on them. All right, so it's very, very rare. It's introduced, and if you're in Connemara particularly, you might come across it. But I haven't come across it myself yet. Flat leaves, but again, if you want to be absolutely sure that it's Juncus planifolius, check your inflorescence, really, and no bristly hairs to eliminate Luzula from that there. So we're at the end now of our list practically, and we're left with 3 more. And this time we're looking for florets spaced singly along the length of the stem. So most of the stem is actually split up with florets just singly spaced along them. So let me just show you. And they're very, very fine, very, very short actually. They're maybe about 6 inches high max. So here they are. They used to be known as the toad rush, Juncus buffonius sensolato, but since, well, in the last number of years, they've been split into 3 different species: Buffonius, Rhenarius, and Foliosus. And really, to distinguish between them is quite tricky. You need to look at the segments, the length of the segments, the color of the segments. You need to examine the capsule, and also the habitat is important. Quite challenging. I've tried it myself, and I've been stumped a number of times. But again, we can talk about that maybe in the more advanced webinar later on in the new year. I think it's in February. So if you're interested in that, we can have a look at that in more detail. But the toad rush sensulato is easily recognizable. It's fine, it's small, damp, muddy, sort of grassy, boggy areas. So peaty, boggy, grassy, clay areas that are quite wet is where you'll find that. Okay, so that's the 18 juncuses, and hopefully out of those you'll be equipped to go out and see if you can find these. Now, just a quick mention of hybrids and subspecies. I'm not really going to get into this webinar, but there are hybrids out there, and there's some hybrids that are very common, and these are 3 common hybrids here. Juncus inflexus and effusus that we saw at the very beginning. Here's the photographs just to remind you. They can hybridize to form Juncus x diffusus. And again, there's kind of intermediate characteristics that we can go into in more detail at the later webinar, if you so wish, if that's what you'd be interested in. Likewise, Juncus conglomeratus and effusus can hybridize to get Juncus x Kern regeltii, which is pretty rare actually, but you can find it. Sometimes you can find that when you're out and about. Juncus articulatus and acutiflorus, these 2 with our hollow stems with the segments, that can sometimes be not easy to decipher between, can produce a hybrid called Juncus surianus. But actually, just a tip about this one: if you put the capsules between your thumb and your fingers and give them a squeeze, if you're not sure which one you have, and if the capsules are really soft, they're infertile, which would tell you that you actually have that hybrid there. If the capsules are hard and solid, you know that you either have articulatus or acutiflorus. But again, we can talk about those at a later stage. And look, there's a really brilliant resource on the BSBI website there on these hybrids with more information if you're interested in those. Now, almost finished. I might just very briefly run you through some keys and guides. There's the NBDC Sedges and Rushes that I based this talk on today. Another one, a bigger book, not very suitable for bringing out into the field, but Francis Rose's Grasses, Sedges, Rushes and Ferns. It's really, really good. And the diagrams, the pictures are in color. I don't know about you, but I love color pictures, and really handy, easy, accessible key in that as well. There's a key in this Sedges and Rushes one as well that's simplified, and this one is equally user friendly. There's a really nice photographic guide here by Dominic Price. I don't have in this one in my possession, so I can't tell you the details of it, but I know a lot of people use this and it can be very useful for beginners. And of course, then we can't forget about Clive Stace and Webb's Irish Flora for more advanced keying out of the rushes. And look, just to finish off with, to say thank you very much to everybody. I really appreciate your patience with the technical difficulties there, and just hope that you've learned something and can take away something today. And if there's anybody that's more advanced than beginners here, which I'm sure there is, and you've got anything, any tips to add, I'd be delighted to hear them. And if you have any questions, I'm sure James will bring them up now. So look, I'll stop. Well, yeah, I'll stop sharing here for now, unless any of the questions is related to this, any of the photos here. But I'll stop sharing for now, and I'll hand back to James. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lynda. That was absolutely fantastic. I have really, really enjoyed it. In fact, before you even brought it up, I was following along with my sedges, rushes, and ferns.
Good stuff.
And I must say, I'm not the best botanist in the world, but I like to imagine I've got like a reasonable overview. Juncus what was it? Planifolius?
That's
Never
correct.
heard of that before. Never seen that. Completely blew my mind. Looks so different to all the Juncus I'm used to. So, and I think that actually fits with one of the questions that we've been asked, which is, do all of the species found in Ireland also occur in Britain? So I'm guessing Planifolius doesn't.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I'm doing a bit of research on rushes in Britain at the moment. Uh, and I have a list of all the ones that occur in Britain and Ireland. And unfortunately, I cannot remember offhand, James, I'm afraid. So I can, if I have a chance to have a look at the list here while other questions are coming through, I might come back to that because I'll see I might have that list in an Excel file on my laptop here, so I might just sneakily look at that to see if I can find out the answer to that question while other questions are coming through. So
Good plan. I was so flabbergasted by Planifolius. I looked it up on the BSBI Plant Atlas, and I can see that's an Irish speciality, but there may be others possibly.
okay.
So thank you for that question. Leanne asks, are rush species always associated with damp habitats or waterside habitats, or do any species grow in dry ground or just very different habitats?
Yeah, well, certainly the 18 that we had a look at tonight. They are either all coastal or damp conditions. Yeah. So, and I suppose they're kind of adapted to damp conditions. If you remember Juncus effusus with the spongy pith, that's specialized tissue called erenchima, which is it's a kind of an adaptation of rushes that they either have hollow stems or that spongy erenchima to maximize the amount of oxygen that they can access in watery, sort of waterlogged conditions. So they're or with hollow tubes, even if you remember the really thin Juncus bulbosus with the two hollow tubes, they're mostly adapted to maximize the amount of oxygen that they can get in damp conditions. So I would say those 18 we looked at, they're either damp conditions from a coastal point of view in the marine environment or freshwater in the terrestrial environment. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And as you just mentioned, Juncus bulbosus, Paul asks, can you feel the two tubes from the outside?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. And not really, because it's only kind of a millimeter thick. So and even with a hand lens, it's pretty hard to see where those two tubes are. That's why I had in the slide that they apparently look solid. So it's really when you cut it with a blade or even with your nails, if you split the stem and you just look at, the transverse section with a hand lens, you have to look really, really carefully to see those two tubes. So I suppose I had kind of a sideways figure of eight just as a symbol there, which might be a little bit misleading because it looks as if there's a ridge in between, but that ridge doesn't realistically exist. So, no, you can't really feel that tube with your fingers. You'd have to see it with a hand lens split.
So thank you. Um, Linda asks, are Articulatus, acutiflorus, and subnodulosus common across Ireland?
Yeah, well, certainly articulatus is very common. Uh, Acutiflorus is very common as well. And subnodulosis is a little less common, but it is frequent, particularly in the west of the island of Ireland and in the centre of Ireland. But it is one that you won't come across as often. It's more, which is like articulatus and acutiflorus are more found in kind of damp acidic conditions, neutral acidic conditions, whereas subnodulosis is more a calcareous species. So if you're in a kind of calcareous fen or wet area like that, that's where you'll find subnodulosis. So it's 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 uh it's far less common than the other two.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And if anyone's interested in distribution information, have a look at Plant Atlas 2020. In fact,
Yeah.
I've just opened that up, and as Linda described, Articulatus is found basically in every hectare in Ireland. Acutiflorus is found in almost every hectare in Ireland, whereas subnodulosis, you can see that it's a lot more limited to about, I mean, maybe a quarter of hectares and a kind of distinct band across there. So if you're interested in any distribution data, have a look at Plant Atlas.
Yeah.
Juncus tenuis, is it known to have any negative impacts on native habitats that you are aware of, or is it just localized to disturbed ground around pathways, etc.?
Well, that's a really interesting question because, as you said earlier, James, I'm kind of a lecturer in wildlife biology degree in MTU there in Kerry, and we have fourth year students. They have to carry out a project that lasts the year, and they write up a thesis. And I have two students in the past couple of years that have studied Juncus tenuis with this very question in mind. And basically, what they've done is they've surveyed it in Killarney National Park and in the surrounding areas, and they've looked at quadrats and compared vegetation where they grow, where they exist and where they haven't, and they haven't really found any negative impacts of
Interesting.
Juncus tenuis. So I suppose there is some debate that maybe it compete with Juncus articulatus or not. But I think because it is found in such trampled sites because of people trampling and stuff, it loves trampling for some reason, that I think it's more the trampling that is damaging than the actual presence of Juncus tenuis. So it's more an alien than an invasive, although it invades in the sense that it spreads very, very easily, but it doesn't seem to do ecological damage, I suppose, to our Irish native vegetation. Not as yet. There's no evidence for it as yet.
That's really interesting. Yeah, quite yeah, interesting. Those subtle differences between it can be widespread but not necessarily causing yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's because it's so fine and so small that it actually doesn't really have a chance to outcompete anything. And then in non-trampled sites, it disappears because I think the Irish vegetation is more robust and will outcompete it. So the only place that it can actually thrive is probably trampled areas where other vegetation is kind of suppressed, really.
Thank you for that. We've got at least two questions asking where people can get their hands on islands, sedges, and rushes.
Oh, well, if they go to the National Biodiversity, just Google National Biodiversity Data Center and go into, they have an online shop there. And maybe if I can look it up, I can put it in the chat, actually, the link.
Yeah, or we can put it in the kind of email that goes out
Yeah,
kind of the
perfect. Yeah.
YouTube
So you can
description.
buy it online. I think look, don't quote me on this, but it's around €16, I think, for it. And maybe does that €5 postage or something, or maybe it include, I'm not sure, but it's around €16 anyway. So the National Biodiversity Data Centre's website, they have a lot of resources there. There's a grass guide as well that was produced there a few years ago, and this is the next kind of series, the Sedge and Rush Guide. So that's where you'll find it.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So Amy says, Lynda, what a great talk. And lots of people are saying how
Oh,
much
well,
they've
thank you
enjoyed the
very much,
talk.
Amy. Thank you.
You mentioned you could possibly talk a little more about the Juncus bulbosus differences when found in aquatic habitats. I would love to hear more.
Okay, perfect. Well, I suppose it is a case of elimination, really, eliminating other things. Uh, because it grows so straggly and so chaotically that it's very hard to sort of say what its actual features are. But it could look like a very, one of those filamentous Potamogeton species. But the way to rule out Potamogeton is just to literally look to see if there's alternate leaves. And if there's alternate leaves, it's and stipules, which are like big, long ligules between the axils of those leaves, you can say that it's probably Potamogeton. If it's all straggly and chaotically branched and everything's coming everywhere, and if you get one of those leaves and peel it back and you see no ligules, no stipules, and chaotic branching, you're most likely have Juncus bulbosus. If you're in an acidic river scenario, so acidic sort of upland streams, that's typically where you'll find it. And it's just the chaotic branching, no ligules and no alternate branching to rule out the other things is probably the best pointers for that.
Wow, it's amazing to think of a rush being possibly confused with a Potamogeton. That seems so
Yeah,
strange. Yeah.
no, it is nuts. And there has been debate. I did a little bit of research on that. There was a bit of a debate, botanical debate in the past there. Should it be a separate species or a separate subspecies?
Mm.
But like Var fluotantus, they were thinking like and some of the older kind of publications, you will see it as a variety or subspecies. But I think the consensus today is that it's just a morphological, it's just morphologically changed because of its environment rather than being a different species or
Yeah,
subspecies or
that's
variety.
so incredibly plastic. That's
Isn't
amazing.
it? Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And somebody else has asked, are there any other rushes that have aquatic forms?
Let me think now. Let me think. No, not that I'm aware of. And I've done extensive river surveying as part of my research in the past. And Juncus bulbosus is the only one that I've come across that's dramatically different. You may find that if you come across Juncus articulatus beside rivers, that they kind of tend to be long and creepy and as if they have stolons just along the banks of the rivers and just on the edges of the rivers. They look a lot longer and stragglier, but you'd still know it was Juncus articulatus. It just looks a bit more straggly than it should be. But other than that, I think bulbosus is the only one that really just goes crazy in water.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Now, there are lots and lots of people in the chat just saying how much they've enjoyed it. I'm afraid we've reached 8 o'clock, so we'll leave
Yeah.
it there. The wonderful thing is that, as Lynda mentioned, she's joining us again next year in February. I think it's the 10th of February, I think it is.
I think that's
Um,
correct. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
do another session looking at slightly more advanced aspects of rush identification. So we will send an email around with a link to this recording and other information, but we will also ask if people have any topics that they particularly like to be covered in that next webinar. So please look out for that. And so with that, thank you ever so much, everybody, for joining us this evening. Thank you so much, Lynda, for that talk, which I've really enjoyed. Everyone's really, really enjoyed. If
Great.
you've enjoyed this, please look out for the rest of our talks in our programme. Next week, we're looking at conifers with the talk Leylandii and their lookalikes, which is a little bit of a tongue twister. And as usual, all of our talks will be recorded and made available on YouTube. Thank you to our funder for funding this series. And with that, I will draw this webinar to a close. Thank you everyone for joining us on this dark evening, and hopefully you'll join us for a future talk. Good night.
Thanks a million, James, and thank you to everybody. Take care.